couple's facing federal charges after an 80-year-old Kentucky woman was convinced to send them money in order to obtain lottery winnings. Kenneth and Elaine Edith Breyer appeared before a federal judge March 30th to face the charges, including mail fraud. Now, court documents say the Breyers were involved in a scheme to get money from the woman in Louisville,
telling her she needed to pay taxes and attorney general fees in order to collect her winnings. They then instructed her to buy and mail cashier's checks to various people and addresses, including the Breyers. In total, the documents say the victim lost $100,000 by sending several checks between January 1st and March 10th as a result of the fraud.
The elderly couple is now on home confinement with stipulations on cell phone use and travel. The judge informed them that for the mail fraud alone, they could receive a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison.